I'm Beth Pariseau, Senior News Writer at Tech Target, and this is IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. Kevin E. Green is Public Sector CTO at OpenText Cybersecurity. Prior to his current role, Kevin worked at the MITRE Corporation, supporting DevSecOps initiatives for sponsors, attack research, and MITRE's Common Weakness Enumeration Program, and served as Cyber Research and Development Program Manager at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Kevin's research in hybrid analysis mapping helped shape and influence Gartner's Application Security Posture Management Magic Quadrant. He has been an outspoken public advocate of challenging the status quo in software engineering practices, as well as government policies and procedures to improve cybersecurity. Thanks so much for being with us, Kevin.
Hey, Beth, I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to kind of finally link up again. I really appreciate you inviting me on.
My pleasure. So, what do you think is the general state of security operations overall, and how can the industry improve it?
I think we're at a very interesting place. With the onset of AI and automation, we know that threat actors are moving a lot faster than what we are. I still think overall our practices are reactive in nature in the sense that we're detecting and finding attacks later in the MITRE attack life cycle. And typically what happens is we never see the data leaving. We never see the initial access, the initial attack vector that was used by threat actors to launch whatever tactics and techniques that they have to try to achieve their objectives. So I do think overall, we are very, very reactive in nature. I use this slide when I talk about our current state of practice is that the threat actors are constantly coloring outside the box. Here we are still coloring inside the box. And we're not failing fast. We're not trying new things. So I think that's the mindset that a lot of people have taken. We're very risk averse, and typically that limits our ability to see things. As we've seen with a lot of the breaches, you can name any breaches. Typically, no one sees the initial access. If so, they would probably have an opportunity to disrupt threat actors' activities and behavior. So I do think that really puts us behind the eight ball, puts us behind the power curve. We're not innovating fast enough. We don't have forward-leaning capabilities. We have not improved not only the state of the art, but the state of practice. So we are going to constantly see these attacks, especially with the proliferation of software. We go moving to the cloud. There's a lot of complexity, and these complexities breeds a lot of chaos, a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of attack points where a threat actor can target. One thing I'll always say is we need to kind of shift more towards what I call responsive cyber defense. And we really need to elevate our visibility so that we can see and be somewhat proactive as opposed to being reactive.
So, yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation with people a lot over the last 6 years. What's it going to take? I mean, the number and magnitude of cost of data breaches just keeps going up and up and up every year. People are spending more and more on cybersecurity tools. So, what is it going to actually take for us to get from that reactive state to proactive, do you think?
Well, I think first and foremost, one of the things that has happened with the national cybersecurity strategy is I think there's language in there to defend for and protect for to disrupt threat actors. The way I codify that is really trying to develop what I call early warning signals of threat actor behaviors. We have to do a better job at leveraging actionable threat intelligence. We have to do a better job at building better situation awareness. A lot of organizations don't even have a threat profile, right? So if you don't have a threat profile, you don't even know what threat actors are targeting your mission, your business. So I think there's some fundamental pieces that we need to improve upon and kind of incorporate that and codify that into our daily operations. And I think part of that is because we just don't have enough policies that allow us the runway, right? Because a lot of times what happens is what I've seen, especially the federal government, people are only going to do what they are told to do. Right.
Yeah.
So it goes back to, color inside the box. Like that, there's this thing where, it's a CYA, right? I'm only going to do what I'm told to do. I'm not going to take risks. I'm not going to try new things and fail fast. Part of it is culture. Part of it is policy. Part of it is advancing the state of practice so that we can hunt down as opposed to hunt up. We know that IOCs are too late in the attack life cycle, right? They are reactive. We know that when we see IOCs, typically you've been owned already by the threat actor and they've already exfiltrated data or achieved whatever objective that they're trying to achieve. Figuring out a way to formalize action with threat intelligence, knowing what threat actors are targeting, what assets will be in a better position to elevate our cyber defense. And the other thing is, we know this phenomenon called software
Yeah.
is currently, causing a lot of problems because it's so ubiquitous. It
Hmm.
powers everything that we do. So I do think that is a underpinning of all of this. There's always vulnerabilities lurking somewhere in software. So
Sure. And we can get to the fundamental issues with software. I know that's something you've said a lot about too, but there's also people talk about a skills shortage and a skills gap in cybersecurity. What can the industry do to address that?
well, the skills shortage things to me is kind of interesting. We're seeing a lot of turbulence in the cyber industry where
Hmm.
a lot of companies are cutting jobs. So as we talk about the
Hmm.
skills shortage, we've seen a lot of companies downsizing or having a reduction in force. So we say there's a skills shortage issue, but I'm not sure that's going to be the recipe for keeping pace with threat actors.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily think there's a bodies issues, right? To me, that when we say skill shortage, it comes across to me like we don't have enough people, right? And
Mm.
and that could be part of it, but
Mm.
obviously with AI and some automation, we can scale some of that. But I just think
Mm.
overall, it's our approach to cyber defense, is
Mm.
our position in terms of how we're going to defend this nation. I
Mm.
think that has to change more so than anything,
Mm.
right? And that's, like again, going back to color inside the box, posture as being reactive has to change,
Mm.
and we have to align that with more forward-leaning technologies that allow us to scale the attack life cycle and get more visibility. But I also think it comes down to having that top cover through policy that allows us to manage our cyber infrastructure. So I'm kind of like torn when I hear the skill shortage because I'm not sure that's going to get us closer to keeping pace with threat actors.
You know, I'm glad you bring up AI because there are some people who do put their hope in AI and advanced automation as a way to catch up security operations with threat actors. So, how do you see that playing out? What do you think will be the most effective use of AI?
I think there are some use cases AI fits well for, but I also think it's not a panacea, right? It's not
Sure.
going to solve world hunger, right? I still think we try to position AI as a way to get better detection. And I do think some of that could be done because we're seeing the use of multi cloud environments where the attacks can be across multi cloud. So
Mm.
building and stitching that context becomes very important. There's some use cases and benefits for AI and really trying to understand and be able to predict potential attack vectors and things about software. But
Mm.
the downside to that, I'm not sure we have enough data to train these AI models to provide that predictive analysis and contextual analysis that's needed to hone in. Part of it is, yes, AI can help with some of the automation, some of the mundane things that typically has been left to humans to do. But I'm not sure if AI is going to deliver the outcomes that people are intended because I think a lot of it is hype. It's just a matter of how do we formalize that as part of our traditional workflow and focusing on the things that matter the most.
Right. I mean, we've seen even big companies, cybersecurity vendors in their own right, Microsoft and Dell, have these massive breaches and not detect them, or months later still not really know, like you were saying, that initial path of attack. And clearly, big companies like that have tools at their disposal and data, but there's a difference between data and visibility, right? So, is there a sense that maybe AI alert reduction, as has happened in the observability space, could distill more signal from noise? Or what would it look like to gain that visibility as opposed to just data?
I wonder, as I was looking, on the sidelines with the Cyber Safety Review Board view of Microsoft, I often wonder, no one saw that an account was compromised.
Huh.
Like there are certain things that make you scratch your head, like, huh? Like, what I mean? But it could speak to the gaps in our overall cyber defense as a whole. We say these things are going to do this and that. We say that EDR, XDR are going to solve this, but I'm not so sure that at scale it can keep pace with the amount of complexity in the IT stack. There's this thing about understanding user entity behavior analytics and identifying the anomalies or the deviations of normal behavior. How do we belly up those critical alerts to provide the context that's needed to make informed decisions about specific attacks? And I think part of it also is understanding these things are late. So indicators of attack are late in the attack life cycle. Indicators of compromise are late in the attack life cycle. So one of the things we've been doing here at Open Text is really trying to build competencies around adversary behavior analytics and really understanding the early warning signs of attacks so that we can be on the front end and then hunt early in the attack life cycle, understanding that adversaries going to do a lot of different things, right? They're going to do a lot of reconnaissance because there's so much data that's available on the dark web and other places. We know they're going to do some type of phish. Like we know there's some initial attack steps. So if we see signs of communication pathways from internal assets communicating out to infrastructure that is either controlled or owned or set up by a threat actor that's supporting a offensive campaign, we can identify those early warning signals before a threat actor try to gain initial access. Once initial access is gained, the game is pretty much over. We've seen this done before in the 2018, I believe, midterm election where U.S. Cybercom was building what they call these early warning signals, right?
Hmm.
Indications of warnings is an old military term, but we know that early warning signs, early warning signals around adversary behavior analytics allows us to disrupt threat actors. Not say we're going to stop them, but it allows us to be disruptive in increasing the level of effort to try to achieve their objectives. So
This is a little bit more on the left side of the proverbial DevSecOps spectrum than SecOps, but in April, you published a pretty extensive article on LinkedIn calling for the industry to fundamentally rethink its approach to the quality and security of software in the first place. And a quote from that article is that, as it is, there are too many things broken with modern software that are foundational in creating a healthier software world. So, is there any role for security operations in that? And how do you see that playing out in the future?
when I was at DHS Science and Technology Directorate, I met some really, really smart computer scientists. And to this day, I still lean on some of them and just talk about things and ideas that I have in terms of, things that I think are broken. That's kind of how that paper, that article came about. And I do think that there are a lot of things that are preventing us from having a healthier software world. But the role of SecOps, we know that threat actors are starting to use 0 days
Mm,
to exploit software. Phishing has been probably the most important attack vector, but we know that 0 days are being weaponized and they're using these 0 days to launch ransomware attacks.
mm-hmm,
So we know that there's a synergistic alignment with SecOps to a certain extent because
mm-hmm,
understanding your attack surface to me is important, right? And more software we use, that increases our attack surface. So I do think understanding what assets you have, not saying that's necessarily a SecOps role, but SecOps can then use that as a way to understand what they need to monitor, how they need to prioritize what they monitor.
mm-hmm,
Understanding the prevalence of CVEs that's in your environment. We know that because 0 days are being used, we need to start hunting for CVEs. So as software vulnerabilities become more prevalent and 0 days become the mode of operation for threat actors tradecrafts, we have to do a better job at getting a grasp and handle on our attack surface that's associated with software, their patch levels, and I think some of that can be associated with having good transparency, and I think SBOMs has a role in that.
mm-hmm.
I think by and large, software is typically that piece that we haven't really taken into consideration in terms of how threat actors are trying to attack us. And I do think that SecOps, understanding some of those principles around the attack surface, the patch levels associated with software that is used in the environment, but also our ability to be responsive in patching becomes important as well.
Yeah.
And then understanding protection mechanisms where there's visibility for systems that there is no known patch for or you can't
Mm.
patch. You got to be able to protect those or quarantine those in a way where you limit access to those systems until they can get them patched. So I think that's a fundamental thing that SecOps can potentially bring to bear and have practices and standard operating procedures to better understand and manage.
And patching seems to be a sore spot. I've seen over the years the synopsis used to be Black Duck survey. I mean, patching this long after Equifax, it's still not happening. And that's not an advanced cloud technology. So, what's the disconnect there? Is it just kind of people are trying to fight fires and they don't have the bandwidth? Or what do you think is the issue with patching?
People resist change.
Mm,
And that becomes our Achilles heel. That human deterministic aspect does breed some complacency and forces us to be reactive. There's also the need to really understand the environment, like what's in the environment. Like, what do I need to patch? How do I need to patch? What is going to affect? How do I communicate upstream or downstream to suppliers, to customers? And we saw it with Equifax, that time frame while you're trying to figure that out,
Yeah.
vulnerability disclosure, all these things. Like threat actors constantly doing things. They're not stopping. There's active exploits now. So the time to exploit has really, really shrunk. It's hours, it's not even days anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the ability to be responsive to that becomes very important. So I don't think we can patch as fast as we need to. And
Mm.
knowing that organizations have to anticipate, adapt, and evolve their cyber defenses to be more resilient in that regard. So
Mm.
that may be trying to understand, how do we quarantine certain assets? How do we limit access? And that could be a way to help minimize the potential disruption or the potential target of certain assets. And that's a good use case for AI, right? How do we do automated patches? I've seen a lot of studies from research that when I was at DHS, DARPA, some other places. I think it's a start, right? It's a start to kind of, how do we advance that and make that more innovative so we can get these things in our environments, because we need it badly. We need that very bad. So
I agree. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for taking the time. I really appreciate your insights here, and thanks for being with us.
that went fast.
Yeah,
Hopefully we could do it again at some point. I
sure.
appreciate you inviting me. And, I always say, I joke people, I have this hashtag, don't bug me to death.
Uh,
And that's from a talk I gave back in 2017. But it's figuratively and literally. Software has become so critical in everything we do. Whether it's in automotive, whether it's in medical devices, there's a lot of potential fatality that can be associated with software bugs. So me writing that Fixing the Broken Pieces was a way to have a voice from the R&D community, because right now the R&D community is not, no one is consulting from what I'm understanding.
hmm.
And I do think there's things that we've been told to do
Mm.
that don't produce the intended outcomes. Like, for instance, I don't think there's a such thing as secure software. I don't think it's attainable, because all software has vulnerabilities, or they have CWEs that are waiting to be exploited. So the notion of secure software, like, we have to change our mindset and start thinking about software resiliency. Like, how can we build better software that's resilient to attack? I
Yeah.
don't think an SDLC works, right? I don't think we have the data to prove that an SDLC works. That's why I think we're seeing a lot of issues with software, especially in modern software development. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you reading that paper.
Of course, my pleasure. This has been IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. If you have any feedback on this episode or want to share questions, comments, or stories we should consider covering, please reach out to me at B as in boy, P as in Peter, A-R, I, S as in Samuel, E-A-U at techtarget.com. Please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast on your platform of choice. And tune in next week for our continued conversations with industry experts about the challenges facing security operations. Thank you for being with us so far.